right, so this is week 4 of me talking about this, basically the talks on this book called Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. For those of you that have been here, I know you've heard this part. You know what? Actually, I just want to start with that video. I like it.
Alia and Gael have to trust each other. As acrobats in Cirque du Soleil, they sometimes literally put their lives in someone else's hands. Trust is a confusing thing. It seems so simple, but when you try to pin it down, it can be elusive. I think of the way that my body sits on a surface that's new to me, unknown, and how my muscles remain tight, anticipating anything, and I'm constantly aware of that surface. Over time, with familiarity, I can relax and start to lean back. For many of us, that initial tension exists so much of the time. We expend so much energy watching and calculating, trying to predict, reading signals in people, ready for anything to change suddenly, preparing to be disappointed. So much energy spent. We talk about trust as something you build, as if it's a structure or a thing, but in that building there seems to be something about letting go. And what it affords us is a luxury that allows us to stop thinking, to stop worrying that someone won't catch us if we fall, to stop constantly scanning for inconsistencies, to stop wondering how other people act when they're not in our presence. It allows us to relax a part of our minds so that we can focus on what's in front of us. And that's why it's such a tragedy when it's broken. A betrayal can make you think of all the other betrayals that are waiting for you and things that you haven't thought of, and people you rely on. And you can feel yourself tightening up, bracing, and in the worst cases, you might resolve to trust no one. But that doesn't really work. Trust is your relationship to the unknown, what you can't control. Control everything. And it's not all or none. It's a slow and steady practice of learning about the capacity of the world. And it's worth it to keep trying. And it's not easy. Alia says that trust is like a fork, not one way, but many ways. Physical, emotional, and maybe something else.
Uh-oh.
I almost imagine trust as these invisible hands that we stretch out into the world looking for someone to hold on to as we walk into the unknown future. Alia and Gael began practicing together as friends, and now they are a couple. It took time. So who do you trust? How can you grow it?
This idea of vulnerability that Brene Brown talks about in this book, Daring Greatly, and the willingness to trust are intimately tied. They say some really interesting things. It's kind of hard to hear what, the narrator's saying these really cool things, but it's visually so compelling that it's actually kind of hard to hear. The thing that struck me about this is when he says over time and with familiarity we can relax and start to lean back. And so how I want to tie that to vulnerability is to say that we practice it until we can lean into it. Now, for those of you that haven't been here, the way that Brene Brown defines vulnerability is somewhere on one of these pieces of paper. Uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure, right? And she spent her 15 years in the social work field, went into research, went intending to research human connection, and what she found out was that when you ask people about connection, they talked about disconnection, and then they talked about shame, and then she identified this small subset of her research participants that she named the wholehearted. And they showed this amazing ability to go ahead and put themselves out there and be resilient to the bumps and bruises of everyday life, and yet to live what she called wholeheartedly. And that's what she wrote this book on, the piece that we're calling vulnerability. So I want to remind you why it is that it's important that we talk about this. I mean, other than from a psychological perspective. From a spiritual perspective, if we are really here co-creating our lives with the power and presence that we're calling Spirit or God, creation only happens when something new comes where there was nothing before. And so the way to wrap that up is with a quote from Alan Cohen that says, "Life begins at the end of your comfort zone." Because that's where creativity, innovation, and change take place, at the end of our comfort zone. What Brene Brown also says is we are vulnerable. By nature of our existence, we are vulnerable. Our choice is whether or not to embrace it. We have the choice of pretending like we're not vulnerable, and then we build these really elaborate walls or glass houses or stone houses, whatever it is, in the attempt to keep ourselves from being hurt. The problem is, of course, that what we do is trap ourselves on the inside. And I guess that it's a good strategy if your theory is, well, if somebody's going to hurt me, it might as well be me, then go ahead and build your wall. But that's about the only thing it's good for. One of the points, actually what we're going to talk about today is how we shift a culture that rewards invulnerability. I hope by this point, the last 3 weeks have inspired you to the idea, or to embrace the idea that this thing called vulnerability is a good thing, and that you're willing to give it a test run. I want to tell you again, so I talked about why that's important from a personal perspective, because life begins at the edge of our comfort zone. Well, here's the other part of that. See, the Centers for Spiritual Living, our umbrella organization, has this tagline. And the tagline is, "A world that works for everyone and a life that works for me." So we do this vulnerability practice because it actually creates lives that work for us. And then there's the part that's a world that works for everyone. So I want to give you read you a couple of quotes that Brene Brown talks about, because she began looking at this idea of being invulnerable in corporate environments and in educational environments specifically. And these are, I believe, actually quotes from people who participated in her research. So she's talking to this one guy who was the Entrepreneur of the Year for CNN. And she asked him, what's the most significant barrier to creativity and innovation? And this is what he says. "I don't know if it has a name, but honestly, it's the fear of introducing an idea and being ridiculed, laughed at, belittled. If you're willing to subject yourself to that experience, and if you survive it, then it becomes the fear of failure and the fear of being wrong. People believe they're only as good as their ideas, and that their ideas can't seem too out there, and they can't not know everything." The problem is that innovative ideas often sound crazy, and failure and learning are part of revolution. Failure and learning are part of revolution. Evolution and incremental change is important, and we need it. but we're desperate for real revolution, and that requires a different type of courage and creativity. Now, if you talk to people who live in really constricted or who work in really constricted corporate environments, they'll tell you what we're in need of is a revolution. How many school teachers do we have here? Revolution necessary? Revolution. Incremental change? Probably not going to help. Well, incrementally, maybe. This is a kid from her research. There are times when you can ask, we're talking about a classroom. There are times when you can ask questions or challenge ideas. But if you've got a teacher that doesn't like that, or the kids in the class make fun of people who do that, I think most of us learn that it's just best to keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your grades high. See, the thing about it is we not only need it in the classroom, we not only need it in the corporation, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the world that's going to require a tremendous amount of creativity, innovation, and change in order to shift. And that can only happen if we're willing to step out there. And so what we have to commit to is to becoming leaders. And I don't mean the leaders of corporations. I don't mean any of those things. I mean what Brené Brown says when she talks about a leader. And that's anyone who holds him or herself accountable for finding potential in people or processes. See, that's me. I want to see a world that works for everyone, and I am willing to become the change that I want to see. I can't just be the change I want to see, because nobody taught me how to do that. I have to become it. And in order to become it, I have to practice it. In order to practice it, I have to develop what I would call an open heart, an open mind, and an open will. And that simply means that I am willing to take a chance. That's this. I'm willing to have an open heart. This means I'm willing to think differently or hear a different perspective. And perhaps most importantly and hardest to pick up is, based on my experiences, my conversations, my insights, my interactions with you, I am willing to be different. I am willing to act differently. I am willing to be moved. And all of that is risky. So the thing about it is, that I've thought about, is that it's a great idea, vulnerability, like how do you put socks and shoes on that? So we've talked about it all that. We've talked about it from a couple of different angles, but like when you go out into the world, then how do you take that up? Does that make sense? So what do I do now? Well, I don't know, sort of. Because it's a practice, right? So we each practice, and we're the ones that have to attend to, God, am I walking around in the world with an open heart? Am I willing to breathe through whatever's going on so that I can think or hear or see differently? And then am I willing to incorporate that when it's appropriate and become a new me because of it? So I wanted to start out with something, well, I think it's simple. Sort of. Don't ask my beloved if I think it's simple. That wouldn't be fair. About 7 years ago, I started working with a concept for myself that I call undefended. What's it like to walk around in the world undefended? Meaning, what would life be like if I really knew that nothing and no one was against me, because all there is God, and that all situations were my further growth? Now, I'm not talking about putting yourself in stupid situations. I'm talking about walking around in my own life in a way that I really assume that everything is for my growth. When I did that, I became free. I became free. piece by piece, day by day, I became free. Because I don't have to use any energy to defend myself, because nothing can hurt me. Anything could change me, but nothing can hurt me. Really. Not me, not the essence, not the God presence within me. And all of this, the stuff about my personality, the stuff about the way I am in the world, that's not me. That's a malleable form that God or Spirit is operating through. Nothing can hurt me. The way that I went about that is something I want to share with you all today. And we're going to do a little, just play around with it a little bit. If you would kind of sort of take one of those and pass them around. The way that I did that is I began to, let's say, for example, stop pretending I had all the answers, and I learned to say, I don't know, can you explain it to me? Or I'm not understanding that, can you say it a different way? Anybody that's part of the leadership here knows that I regularly ask for input. Is there something I need to be doing differently? Are my talks going okay? Do you have any input? Do you have any feedback? Because I want to grow. I want to be more. Right? I want to be freer. I want to have more freedom. I want to be more masterful. And that stuff only happens when I open myself and say, talk to me. So all that to say that one way into this idea of being a little bit more vulnerable in the world, and something that's tangible that we can practice, is to begin to use the vernacular of openness. And that's what I would call this. This little piece of paper you have has some examples of the language of openness. So what I'd like to do first is just take a few minutes and look at it and kind of make a mental note of 1, 2, maybe 3 of those phrases that you find particularly compelling. Compelling in any way. And then find a person or two next to you and talk about that with them for a couple of minutes, and listen to what they've said, and then we're going to go on to the next piece as soon as you do that. So everybody, did I explain that pretty clearly?
No. Sorry.
All right. You get the piece of paper?
Got it.
I'm affirming that there's a phrase or two on there that jumps out at you. You're going to actually have a conversation, a dialogue with the person next to you or a couple of people next to you about that phrase, what speaks to you, why you particularly hate it, why you love it, why you use it, why you don't. And then you are going to just listen to them and what their phrase or 2 or 3 is, why they love it, why they hate it, why they use it, why they don't. We're going to take about 5 minutes to do that, and then I'll ding you when it's time to turn your attention back to the front. So let me have your attention, please. Lisa? Lisa thought she was in trouble there for a minute. So, of course, the first part of practicing something is like identifying what it is that you're seeking to practice. And what I want to know is, are you willing to practice this vulnerability thing a little bit more? Let me see a show of hands if you're willing to practice a little more. All right. Great. So I'm going to sit right here, and I'm going to ask you to come up as you're ready. And we'll just have a couple people come up and share. Can you see how amazing it is? You see how amazing it is? And can you see how Rodney's willingness to practice is rubbing off on his students? And we don't know where that ripples to. We don't know. But what I do know is this. The strength that you see when people are willing to come up here and do that, that is your strength too. So remember, Brene Brown says that we see it as strength in other people, but weakness in ourselves. And it's a lie. So to wrap this up, I guess what I'm asking y'all is to Live at the edge of your own comfort. Live at the edge of your own creativity. What I can promise you, what I swear to you, is the life that is waiting for you, the love that is waiting for you, is beyond anything you can imagine. Freedom that's waiting for you. And the second part of that is if you are willing to be a leader, if you are willing to be accountable for people and processes, then the biggest thing you can do is go out and model what it looks like to live at the edge of your own comfort zone. And I want to assure you of this, that it's not that you get, my experience anyway, is not that I've gotten to a place where I don't, where sometimes it's not like, but yeah. So the more vulnerable you're able to be as a way of being in the world, it may hurt more, but it will bother you less. It may hurt more, but it will bother you less. Let's pray. So I'm just so grateful for this dance with the divine. I am so grateful to have this place and these people to practice with. Because what I know is that we are, all of us, the absolute essence of spirit. And then I know that we are the relative presence of spirit as well. And that's the part of us that is showing up and growing up in time as God, as Spirit. What a privilege it is to have a place to speak the truth, to have a place to watch people model the truth, to model deep courage. I'm deeply grateful to Brene Brown for giving us this lens through which we can view ourselves in a new way. And so I'm remembering, actually not remembering, I'm reading, where the title of this book, this talk series came from. What is it to dare greatly? It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man or woman who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again. Because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, great devotions, who spends himself or herself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end triumph, and at worst, if he fails, at least he fails while daring greatly. So what I'm affirming and declaring and knowing is that there's really no such thing as failure. What we get is the eternal do-over. The eternal getting ourselves up, brushing ourselves off, opening our hearts, opening our minds, opening our wills, and walking back out into the world to be a light shower, to be a way shower. Surrendering to the idea that there is no one or no thing that stands against us, because one with spirit is a minority. And anywhere we look, there is God. So I release this all with a big, deep breath. And I bless this day. And so it is.